Hey everybody, welcome back to the Golden Bolt, and welcome to a bit of a landmark episode. Today is the 30th review I've put out on this channel, and it's the first review of a PC game. So without further ado, let's take a look at Balthazar's Dream. Now before we begin, I do want to note that I received a copy of this game for free from the developers at PsiloBYTE Games for the purposes of this review. That's not going to change my opinion of the game itself, but it's worth noting for transparency's sake. One normal day, a boy named Dustin and his dog Balthazar are playing catch in the park. Things go sour very quickly though. Dustin doesn't know his own strength and throws the frisbee across the street. While running after Balthazar, Dustin gets hit by a car. Didn't your parents teach you to look both ways, kid? The boy is rushed to the hospital where doctors expect him to succumb to his injuries. In what's certainly a health code violation, Balthazar refuses to leave the room and sleeps with his master at the foot of the hospital bed. This is where the story starts to get a little weird. Balthazar starts having a strange, seemingly guilt-induced dream. In this dream, he travels through several different worlds, all with the end goal of finding Dustin and saving him from being hit by the car. The dialogue is pretty cute, although it's often very simple and never really all that important to the main plot, and there are some mistakes in the writing here and there. Our four-legged hero makes some friends along the way, such as a magical reindeer or something, and one of the dogs that Russia shot into space during the Cold War. Eventually, Balthazar does find his master and jumps in front of the car to save him. Somehow this dream action saves Dustin in real life, and after fighting off the manifestation of his own guilt with the help of his new imaginary dream friends, Balthazar wakes up to find that Dustin is coming out of his coma. Also, Dustin can understand what Balthazar is saying for some reason. This is where things sort of fall apart. The ending is told via text on a black screen, and it feels super hokey. Dustin and Balthazar become coma specialists, with Balthazar entering the patient's dreams and saving them. They did this for 30 years because, by the way, longevity miracle drug for dogs was invented. That's just thrown in there, okay. Also, one of Balthazar's descendants was the first cyber dog on Mars. That was important too, that needed to be said. There's really not that much I can say critically about the narrative. It's simple and for the most part harmless. I enjoyed it up until this ending bit here. This just sort of sours me on the whole journey though. Things are so tightly wrapped up in a bow, and the rest of their lives are explained away in a few seconds, which makes the adventure itself feel cheap. Add this to the mostly inconsequential dialogue, and you get an average at best story that blows it at the last minute. It is still charming, and there are a few lines here and there that I did appreciate. It almost reads like a story you'd read to your kids at bedtime, which certainly isn't a bad thing on paper, but the execution as a whole is just lacking. I'll give the story a bronze bolt. Balthazar's Dream is a 2D side-scrolling platformer with some intermittent puzzle elements. You take control of Balthazar as he travels through the 10 chapters in his dream, jumping, running, climbing, you know, the usual platformer things. What makes the game stand out is the courage meter. This acts in different ways depending on what Balthazar is doing. If he's climbing ropes, it's a grip meter, but if he's near a scary enemy for an extended period of time, his courage drains. If the meter runs out while he's in the range of a boar, a vacuum, or something else scary, he'll struggle to run towards the enemy, and he'll run away from the enemy twice as quickly. If you touch any enemies or specific hazards like grapes or chocolate, you'll die and be brought back to the last checkpoint you passed. Well, actually, it's not the last checkpoint you passed, it's the last one you pissed on. You need to come to a complete stop directly in front of one of these checkpoints for about a full second before Balthazar will, get the water running, if you know what I mean. This is a bit of a nitpick, but this directly prevents the game from moving at the pace I'd want to play it at. I can't play fast and loose with Balthazar's Dream because if I do, a single mistake is sending me back through entire chunks of the marathon levels. With the game's very loose, often unreliable controls, that's even worse. In a platformer, I like the mechanics to be crisp enough that I can only blame myself for failure. In this case, I felt myself blaming the game itself more than my skills. Yes, full disclosure, I played the game with the default keyboard controls, but I really can't blame the controller when the game itself makes me take leaps of faith. See, that courage meter is used to give you a speed boost in some sections. That scary vacuum sitting right there? You want to run away from it after it's drained your courage meter and jump at the very last minute in order to cross that long gap ahead of you. However, you lose your momentum as soon as you're out of the scare range, so in midair you drop to your death. Instead of giving you a little bit of leeway as long as you're in the air, you need to be nearly pixel perfect. And the game uses this courage boost as a crutch all the time. Even worse, the game doesn't even organically teach you of this mechanic in a safe environment. It's not likely that you'll learn that you need to scare the crap out of this poor dog before making a jump until you die a few times in this exact section. That is just textbook poor design to me. Now tell me if you've heard this before. I like the idea, but the execution is just lacking. That sentence is a theme for the entire game, not just the story. Each distinct level hub has its own unique gameplay tweak that fits this mold of neat on paper but subpar in practice. The early levels give you a ball that you'll bounce around to kill enemies and let you perform a weird homing attack to make big jumps. That will lead to your death a few times because you're playing basketball with the Unity engine's physics. No bueno. The forest levels add in a stick that you can throw to make an extra platform. The stick sometimes glitches into the walls, and again, throwing things. No bueno. The final few levels either have you flying through space in zero gravity or playing insanely long bullet hell shooter sections. Still no bueno. Then there are other level gimmicks like mushrooms that invert your controls or ticks that'll grab onto Balthazar and slow him down. These are mostly just there to annoy you, and it's not often that they're placed in a spot to add to the experience so much as waste your time. It sounds like I'm ragging on this game a ton, but I did enjoy what I played, somewhat. It just feels like the game needed a good chunk more focus testing in order to narrow down what the issues were and clean them up before the final release. The gimmicks themselves wouldn't even be that much of an issue if I just felt more confident in the game's controls. The momentum even outside of the courage meter feels inconsistent, so I never fully trust my own jumps. Checkpoints are normally spread out evenly enough that this doesn't set me back too far when the mechanics inevitably fail me, but that feels like a crutch to push me further rather than just simply designing a more polished game. The few boss fights this game has aren't much to write home about and are usually, if anything, frustrating since there's only a checkpoint before you start. Again, they're neat on paper, but in design they don't work with this style of game that much. And I haven't even touched on the pacing issues. The first chapter feels 3 times as long as the following 4 or 5 chapters combined. For a game that's only about 2 hours long, including the free DLC bonus level, I have far too many complaints with the core mechanics to give it a great score for its gameplay. A bronze bolt feels fair here as well. While the story sours near the end and the gameplay never fully sweetens, the visuals of this game really bring out the flavor behind Balthazar's dream. While it does have a pixelized art style, it doesn't try to stick firmly within the usual 8 or 16-bit focus. It's just a game with pixelized graphics. The backgrounds are wonderful and really pull off the dreamlike vibe, and that parallax scrolling in both the background layers and the foreground totally pop. Balthazar's animations are clean, the lighting is beautiful, and I absolutely love the effort that went into making the game feel like it's actually from the perspective of a dog. Vacuum cleaners being scary enemies, grapes being fatal obstacles, checkpoints being fire hydrants, it's all just got that amazing charm factor. The only real complaint I would have visually is that Dustin looks kinda doofy. Well, that's not entirely true, I do have another issue here. I mentioned earlier that the game plays out over 10 chapters. However, the visual design behind many of the chapters feels nearly identical. As a result, we get Chapter 1 that takes place in a house locale, and then Chapter 2 through 6 take place in an enchanted forest. The rest of the game after that is all gimmick levels, meaning that the entire core platforming of this platformer is spread among 2 areas, one of which was mostly tutorial. At this point, the game could be called Balthazar Goes to the Woods. I will say that they at least do make up for this a tiny bit by showing the passage of time through the forest levels, starting at night and slowly having dawn break through by the time you leave. The soundtrack is nothing to write home about. I actually really liked it at first because it totally nails the surreal tone that this game shoots for. Then I realized that there are only 3 or 4 songs in this game. Again, this goes back to the forest being half of the game by itself because there's only 1 song that plays for the entire time that you're in the forest. That forest theme becomes grating very quickly once you notice that it's been playing for 15 minutes straight, and by the time you're 15 minutes in, you probably have another 30 to 40 minutes left of hearing that song. For that alone, I'm giving the game a silver bolt for its presentation. Nothing about the game's vibe screams bad, but nothing about it screams great either. The only screaming that's going on is me, as that forest theme slowly drives me insane. And that's where we're going to call it for today, folks. Balthazar's Dream is $5 on Steam if you're interested. Again, the game is so full of neat concepts, but the execution of those concepts just falls flat. That said, the developers at PsiloBYTE Games are taking another shot at it with their new game on Kickstarter, The Artificer. The Artificer? The Artificer? That name doesn't roll off the tongue very well. The Art of Fistser. It's a game where you play as Fistser, and you just punch people. He's got a top hat. It's a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up platformer. Actually, that sounds cooler than Balthazar's Dream. Anyway, if you're interested, check out the Kickstarter link in the description below. The game kind of gives me a vibe sort of like Don't Starve, with the camera angle and the whole atmosphere the game gives off. That's not my kind of game, but if it's for you, give it a look. As always, thank you very much for watching, and join me next week when we take a look at Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. As always, stay golden.